Hello and welcome. This is Corey Angelot here with Aaron Butler, my co-host, and here with a very special guest, Stephanie MoDavis. She considers herself a metaphysician, guide, and a true friend. She mentors private clients and is affiliated with several organizations, assisting in spiritual awakening, personal, relational, and systemic transformation and integration implementation practices. Stephanie's own journey of healing began over 20 years ago, probably more than that by now. She is operating 3 wellness studios, apparently, that are all focused on how understanding and embracing our direct experiences can completely shift our life. She's a co-author also of several books. Her website is StephanieMoDavis.com. That's Stephanie, M-O, Davis.com. And she's a co-founder and executive producer at awakeninghealthcare.com, a co-founder at integrationmentors.com, co-founder and director at regeneratinghealthcare.org. And we're going to be talking a lot about sort of the medical industry, her experiences, and the powerful realizations that she came up to really understand over her many years. And of course, she'll go into this a lot more herself. But just talking with you, Stephanie, we talked before doing this, and it's just powerful. Your stories, your personal stories, and the things that you've noticed within the medical field, the mentalities of the doctors, of the people within the profession, and sort of what you see is not always being fulfilled. Maybe healing that needs to be done on their part, not just the healing that they bring to their clients or to their patients, but also toward themselves. So, how do we introduce this idea? And we're going to be talking about sort of ending that inner slavery, divine inner sacred union. How do we introduce this idea? If you want to introduce a bit more about yourself as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Corey and Aaron, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I feel really honored. I love your community and what everyone's trying to do. And it's not always easy. It's been quite a journey to get where I am. And I know it's been quite a journey for most people that are interested in this sort of natural law, ending slavery work. It's required a lot of direct experience, and it takes a lot to recapitulate and get up sometimes to take action to kind of create this new paradigm that we're all seeking to see exist within the world. And healthcare certainly is not the easiest field to get involved in. In fact, I've had many people wish me good luck and kind of send me on my way because they don't really want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, because they know that there's so many systemic issues, from financial to how our treatment protocols to pharmacology. It's just, there's so much shadow within healthcare that is really difficult to know even where to begin. And in fact, question for so long with my colleague that I work here with in Houston, Texas, who is a physician, was, does this just have to be brought down and a new system be built? Or is there some way that we can salvage and work together with what exists and really distill out of the system what's working and try to somehow shift what's not? But the industry is deeply rooted in some of the most, I want to say, kind of pernicious systems that can get distorted, such as academia, the overly left brain, the intellectual capacity, the just how the whole system functions from soup to nuts is really devoid of the feminine principle completely. And this was the first thing that I noticed when I had my direct experience. So I'm not a healthcare professional. What I call myself is a subjective experiencer with an integrated awareness of what needs to be integrated for better patient outcomes. So what I mean by that is, I got really sick when I was 19 years old. And the weird thing about my sickness, and what really catalyzed this work and me finding the meaning within my experience, came at this time in my life where I actually couldn't have been more healthy. So this is just kind of a myth that I want to kind of debunk, is that sometimes we feel as though unhealthy people get sick, which is very true. But sometimes people who are doing things perceivably really right also can have a problem arise. And that was me. I was doing all of the perceivably right things to do to be healthy. I was a yoga teacher. I was in a healthy relationship. I was vegan at the time, eating all organic, doing all of the, so to speak, healthy community ways of living. And all of a sudden, one day, I couldn't walk. And that proceeded into a lot of testing where I was misdiagnosed about 6 times. And a year went by before they could really truly figure out what was wrong with me. And by that time, I had an autoimmune disease, had already started to wreak a lot of havoc on my inner system by the time they truly figured out or labeled my disease, which was systemic lupus. And at the time, it's a little bit hard to diagnose. So this was about 20 plus years ago. So there had to be like a set of 7 out of 10 criteria all happening at the same time for them to diagnose me with this condition. So the long story short is that it was a hot mess. And that by the time they really figured it out, I was almost on death's door and I was about 21 years old. So for me, inside of my psyche, I felt really betrayed by God, so to speak, because I said, what's up? I'm doing everything right. Like, what's up? What more can I do? And actually, that began a journey of really doing my own internal shadow work because I wasn't going to just settle with not really understanding why this happened when I was working so hard to be so healthy. So, what I realized for myself over a 10-year journey of being really critically ill, in and out of the hospital, on high doses of all sorts of drugs to keep me alive, I had so many doctors say to me, Stephanie, we don't know what else to do for you. Like your body is not responding to anything. I had a lot of doctors who told me to forget anything else that I was doing to help myself as far as the wellness community or the, yoga community, spiritual community. They were saying, well, that obviously doesn't work. So don't do anything there. Just stay on the meds and follow what we're doing. So it was really kind of, I don't know, I felt as though I permitted myself to let go of such a big part of myself because I felt betrayed by it. Because I was already spiritual. I was already doing all the things that I thought were the ideal way to heal. So I felt really betrayed. But I realize now that I had to completely go into the full direct experience of the Western medical model for me to sit here today. So I had to abandon myself from those practices and fully go into it as though I didn't know anything about it for me to get the full observational view of what was really going on within the system. So I spent about 10 years really struggling to stay alive. And obviously everything that they were doing wasn't really helping me. It was barely keeping me alive and making me worse, really, quite frankly. My kidneys completely failed by the age of 25. So I found myself in a dialysis clinic at 25, being dialyzed 3 times a week, 4 hours, 5 hours a day, where the dialysis process, if you don't know about it, it's very difficult. A lot of people don't do well on it. It's very draining. They completely filter your entire system of blood through what looks like a house water filter, and they pull out all the toxins. But because the actual filtration system isn't advanced enough to know what to pull out and what not, it pulls everything out. So pretty much after each session, you just feel dead. You have to eat and sleep and recover those vitamins until you have to go back a day and a half later. So I was on dialysis for 4 years before I was eligible to receive a kidney transplant. And that whole process, guys, of being in the clinics, being shuffled through doctors, going through a transplant center, and being in it, but also having the observational view. So this I believe is my gift, is that I was able to directly go into the experience, but because I had a lot of spiritual wisdom and density built up prior to that, I was also able to observe it. So it's kind of like I was in it fully, but then at times I could really pull back and be like, what's going on here? What needs to be fixed? What's not working? So that was really my gift. And, so at 30, I received my first transplant. And I remember it seemed like the closing of a chapter where the medical field said to me, God, you've been through hell. Now you finally got your kidney. Now you recover and you can get your life back. Like, go get him now. And what happened was, after the transplant, after I recovered and I was fortunate enough to have a donor, there's a lot of misconceptions around donation and there's a lot of shadow in the world of organ donation. But I have to say there are legit people who do need organs. So there has to be a lot of work done in that part of the field as well. I understand that saying organ donation just triggers some people because they hear what goes on in China and some other places. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I wouldn't be here today if I didn't have it. So obviously there, I feel as though it's a positive thing that we just need to clear the shadow out if possible. But after my transplant, I sat there and I was 30. And I remember sitting at my kitchen table and I was supposed to be very happy and elated and excited that finally this hell was over. I was going to be healthy. And I remember just putting my head in my hands and saying, what the hell just happened? Like, I just lost 10 years of my life in a system that felt like I was navigating through some sort of hell environment, and I've lost everything. I didn't have my college degree. I wasn't married. I didn't have any children. I didn't have a job. I was very low income at that time from all the bills I had accrued over the last 10 years. And I was like, yeah, that go get 'em kid like mentality is definitely not how I feel. And then I started to feel like, all right, if I'm going to survive this experience, I have to completely transform what happened to me. Because if I don't, I'm going to lead the rest of my life with these inner, like, CPTSD trauma responses and fears from this 10 years that I just experienced. I don't want to compare myself to a veteran, but I'm saying if you're in a really unhealthy, toxic environment and you're feeling like everything is so discombobulated and crazy, you're traumatized. And then when you get out of it, it's like, yeah, I don't have like anything and I got to start completely over from nothing. And this isn't the reality that I had fought for my life for 10 years. So that's when I started realizing that I'm either going to go into a depression or I need to put my big girl pants on and I need to figure out how to overcome my inner trauma from this experience. So that's when I realized that I had already lost trust in a lot of the aspects of the medical system. I had already had so many interactions with really prestigious medical professionals from big institutions like Hopkins and other really big institutions, where every time they would come to see me, they'd be like asking me questions. How are you doing so well? You're like, none of my patients look like this. Like, can you help me? I'm stressed out. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm dying. And I still seem to have the most amount of spirit and energy of anybody in this system. Something is really, really wrong here. And I started to realize and talk to a lot more patients and see how much they struggled with integrating, and their quality of life was just, I knew that there was so much more potential. So I dedicated the next 10 years of my life operating yoga centers and wellness centers. And the aggregate of my client would always come in and say the same thing, which I understood. They would say, hey, I'm here because I'm recovering from cancer, or I'm getting a divorce, or my son just passed away. I see a therapist, I eat well, I try to exercise, I pray. It's not working. I still need something else. Can you help me? And that's when I really realized, I was like, yeah, I know what you're missing, because it was what I experienced was missing from the system the whole time. And it's what people don't know how to do in terms of recovering from trauma, reconciling these circumstances that we go through. And about the same time, I had a really amazing catalytic interaction with a friend of mine who turned out to really be like a mirror of my shadow, right? So sometimes people label this, like in the new age community, they'll call it like a twin flame, or like somebody who's comes into your life, knocks your socks off, but they like embody your polarity. And it's super triggering. It's just real confusing. It appears to be toxic unless you start to conceptually understand the potential within what appears to be toxic. So because I had such a passion for figuring things out and pattern recognition, I was like, something's happening here that actually it's a potential for me to integrate myself through the things that are triggering me about this person. And as I started to do that shadow work, that mirror work, he was in healthcare. So simultaneously, I was like, oh, this is so interesting, because now I see that the system cannot be any better, because their focus is completely on the left brain externalization of helping a human being, even biologically, as far as like technology and AI and advancements and equipment and things like that. But there's absolutely the further we go out in our innovative process for healthcare, the further we get away from that inner tech, that inner consciousness, that transformation that has to be done within. So I realized very quickly, if I'm going to help myself recover from this, if I'm going to try to help other people, I actually first need to work with the professionals, because they are so devoid of the spiritual nature within themselves, and their ability to be really fully self-aware is just completely devoid. This starts in medical school. They're completely trained out of their feminine side. And they have knowledge, and a lot of them do have heart. So this is the thing. I've met a lot of practitioners now in the work that I'm doing. And at first, it was a little overwhelming to see. I felt like I was an embodiment of the feminine around all of these men and women who were fully left brain, and it felt like we couldn't even see each other, yet alone communicate. But I was really adamant to stay in my feminine principle and get them to listen to me. I didn't want to change. I was really going to be that experiencer and that feminine principle of what I was seeing, even though they were having a really hard time listening to me because I didn't have the credentials behind my name. But I was just really adamant. And what happened was I started to gain attention from certain providers, basically because they reached out to me to help a particular patient. But then what would always happen was they would be the one who needed the help. So I started to realize, oh, okay, I'm literally like mentoring healthcare providers. And they're claiming that it's for their patient because they might not want to admit that they need this work, especially from someone that they can't even describe what she does. But that's what was happening. So then I had about 2 to 3 prestigious providers that, like, behind the scenes, I started working with them with the inner work, the mirror work, the shadow work, the bias. And lo and behold, we all recognize, like, holy shit, excuse my French, this is really powerful. But it's very taboo. It's very taboo because we don't understand it. We don't talk about it. It's not taught. It's, they like to portray themselves as being the ultimate hierarchical knowledge of healthcare. They're the experts. They have the expertise. So it had taken the right medical individuals to either be in so much pain to be able to be open to this, or quite honestly, in both situations that I'm referring to in my mind, that's what it was, is that there was such of an internal impasse and dissonance within themselves that the meeting was very serendipitous, because I realized, I see why we're together, because you're actually ready and you can hear me. Whereas the aggregate of the provider, they might feel burnout, but they have no clue as to the ways in which they're contributing to their own burnout through trauma, emotional expenditure in false ways. I mean, a lot of the hospital system, if you work in it, really operates like a system that looks like it has it together, but behind the scenes, it operates like a high school environment. The group dynamics are very infantile. Most of them can't even stand each other. They talk about each other. So talking about trust within the system, they don't even trust each other within the system. Most colleagues don't even trust other colleagues within the system. So I was starting to put all this together, and all of my experience and all of these interactions I was having and realizing, I know what we really need in the healthcare system to make things begin to be better, which is a new set of first principles where we personally do the self-awareness and mirror work and shadow work on ourselves to be in that system. So we have the foundational principle of self-love. So then when we go out into the world, our missions are aligned and we have better, healthier group dynamics. And then you start to cultivate a system that's starting healthy. You're not taking something that's toxic and trying to continue to troubleshoot it at the end, when meanwhile you haven't even done the real work. And that's what happens, is that because there's a lot of intellects in the system, they hear the ideas, they hear the concepts, They get the ideology and then they usurp it before they embody it. Oh, let me get research to talk about how we can integrate empathy into the system. Meanwhile, they have no clue how to be empathetic themselves. So it's this weird circumstance where, as we all know, the healthcare field is the primary recipient of grants, of resources, of funding, of support. So these other people, such as myself or other people outside of the system who have really cool things to implement, it's really difficult to do because they're not in the know with the culture, right? So it's been really hard to kind of break through that. But long story short, I've gotten some attention of some practitioners, and really what I do now through my personal experience is to cultivate a self-aware system by doing the self-work through each and every individual provider and implementing programs for patients if they're dealing with an illness or a chronic disease, to say, hey, we have this other system if you want to further your potential for healing that has to do with a lot of inner work. So it's one of those things where the system had to, and people within the system, they always would just want to help their patient better because they look better if they can help their patient better. But meanwhile, this really shifts the narrative, because you can't be a part of this system that I have unless you do the work as well. It doesn't matter how many PhDs you have. So it's really like you have to be a part of this system to do your own work, to be able to implement it with your patients. So that's a little bit about my story and what I do. So
Wow. There's a lot. I mean, you covered so much stuff. Do you see a lot of the medical field? How do you see them as being willing to look at themselves or do that mirror work? Because I see it as, it's a shame because there's so much experience and there's so much that people are experiencing. There's the saying, everything you need to know is within you. And I see there's a lifetime of experience in any one person. Do you see them as like how I guess how often do you see people as willing to do this shadow work or be willing to look at the holistic side of things?
So from where I sit right now, because things are rapidly changing actually right now. So what I see is there's already a subsect that has been burnt out and disenfranchised by the system, and they've already left. So when I say the system, I mean the traditional Western model of healthcare or hospital environments, the big guys. So there have been a lot of people that have already completely exited, which I would say are the holistic practitioners, the functional medicine docs, the people who have said like, this system is jacked, I gotta get out, and they do their own thing on the side. One of my desires was I realized that's what we have to do to survive in some circumstances. We have to just exit stage left to get out of an unhealthy situation. But I felt for and had compassion for the people that were in my situation, the people who have a lot of trauma from their past, or they get thrown into this chronic illness situation. And I felt as though they deserved a better opportunity as well. So even though it's the most shadowy place to be, the hospital, I felt it was the one that needed the most work and the system that was going to provide me the most challenge to try to do something within. So there's a certain subsect have already left the system. And then the people within the system, what you find right now is that COVID really amplified the pre-existing condition of the system being broken. Some doctors have been very open in saying that, oh, actually, I think it just ripped the Band-Aid off of what was going on underneath our noses this whole time. We see it more clearly. For instance, such as, we used to glorify hustle culture and I'm working 80 hours a week and I live at the hospital. And there used to be a glorification of the unhealthy behavior because that's the ego, right? And now they're kind of saying, and realizing, actually, my family's been destroyed by this. My personal life isn't that well. Like, actually, this might not have been healthy all along. We may have been looking at it wrong. And then it's funny because Corey and I have a mutual friend we were talking about earlier who, and again, this is this is not for everybody's ears, but I will say it, we call it the temple of COVID. So it's kind of like COVID has done something really bad, but then there's also been something really sacred that has been exposed through this COVID pandemic. And for the healthcare industry, it's been just that. It's been like, we're going to show you right up in your face the ways in which this system is broken and needs to change. So now there's just a huge population of healthcare professionals just leaving, or they're really unhappy. They're really depressed. They're self-medicating. They're literally going down a road as a healthcare expert where they're going to become the patient if they don't find a way to mitigate this, ameliorate this stress. And then there's other people who still are a little bit naive. Maybe they're newer, or they're really glorified in their position. They're kind of more of the narcissist within the system, where maybe they're older, like a surgeon, super ego, gets everything his way. He might not really have to look at himself as much as the normal practitioner or provider might. So there's this dynamic within healthcare that plays out just like in humanity right now, which is like, where are the psychopaths and narcissists as opposed to the empaths and heart-based people? That same dynamic lives within healthcare. So there's heart-based people who are like, this is really wrong. This is not healthy. We got to do more for our patients. I need a healthier schedule. I'm losing the ability to connect with my patients because I'm so stressed out. And then there's the psychopaths and the narcissists of the system who are like, I don't know what's wrong with you. You're weak. This is war. You signed up for this. You have to. So that is playing out within all of our systems as well, from the inside out. So to answer your question, the people within the system who are still within the system and haven't completely left, those people don't really want to talk about fixing the system. They've already been broken by it. And they're like, I got a clinic over here and I don't want to talk about the system. But the people that within the system that are willing to listen right now are the people who are really being broken down. It's the people who, they were born to be a doctor, they believe. They put their whole heart and soul in this, and now they're dying. They're literally trying to keep their head above water. And they're saying, like, if I don't find something to help me, because what I'm self-medicating isn't working, being an alcoholic isn't working, escaping to my ranch on the weekend is no longer helping me. All of the ways they use to mitigate their stress, it's not working. So the people who are seeking the openness to do this work are the people who are really suffering, just like me, when nothing that the system has to offer is actually helping. And they're afraid, I'm either going to quit my job, which I don't want to do, or I'm going to have to find something to help me. So that's where I kind of come in with the work that I'm doing and say, hey, there's this thing, there's this system that I utilized for myself that really helped me when I was fighting for my own survival. And do you want to hear about it? It's really a process towards self-realization and self-awareness, and doing finally taking the mirror and putting it back on them fixing themselves, instead of thinking that they're the experts in fixing others and they've never even done any work to understand how this process works within themselves.
Wow. I have one more question. I really like to ask this one. And I have experience with my health and, being disenfranchised, and it took me a long time to be able to reflect. And, after I went through my whole experience, it took me to start meditating and, experiencing plant medicine and things like that, to where all of my experiences, it's kind of like I was able to take a break and actually reflect, and it gave me some distance. And it was like all of my experiences before this were just like kind of seen before me. What kind of practices do you recommend or that helped you? Like specifically, like you mentioned yoga. I'm not sure if you mentioned meditation, but is there anything that you recommend for someone that is disenfranchised or is in the system and they're really, having a hard time?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to think how I want to say this. There are external practices that people can do that very much are helpful to begin to connect as a gateway to a deeper understanding of the real work that really needs to be done. So as I said, when I got sick, I was already meditating. I was already doing yoga, right? Now, if you haven't been introduced to those fields of study, that may be exactly what your elixir or medicine is in the moment from where you sit. The biggest part of the work that I do is really, truly permitting a better assessment plan for a patient to discover what they've already done and where they are. So really having a personalized program that they learn to create for themselves. So instead of a healthcare system saying, this is how healthcare works, what I do is I come in with their direct experience. We get an assessment of, what has your life been like? Are you more introverted or extroverted? Do you do things? Or are you more, figure out who that person is and then help them to cultivate their own system of what they need to continue to develop on their healing path. I know that Corey and I had often talked about everybody needs something slightly different depending on where they're at, even with things like diet. So putting a one size fits all dimension on anybody on any level of their healing process does not work. Right? So some people were a vegetarian for a very long time. I was a vegetarian for 20 years. That was actually a huge contributing factor to some of my inflammation within my body with my autoimmune disease. And again, this does not sit well for everybody, but we have to mature in our understanding to see that everybody at every different level of awakening requires something different, and it may change. And you have to be open to that shift and change, because your belief system might be coming more so from your what you desire your reality to look like, rather than what your body's really intuitively trying to tell you at each and every moment. So some strong belief systems that we have, again, you have to use discernment and look at your own personal story. And you have to say, well, I've tried this. It didn't really work for me again. Do I want to try again? Or do I want to try Qigong instead of yoga? Or do I want to try a different diet and really see very consciously if that works for me? Or do I need to not do anything else external in my reality and completely start to get rid of everything from within me and just sit here with nothing and think about the ways I need to let people go in my life or create better boundaries? So it's really about finding the person where they're at and then letting them prioritize through just conscious conversation. What is the thing that's really bothering you or hindering right now? And let's think about different approaches for you to try to see if that might be, help you with creating your own system of healing.
It's amazing.
Yeah, thank you for that. I really like everything that you have been talking about, and I think it could resonate with a lot of people simply with their frustration or the confusion with what's going on. And regardless of what people think, like you said about COVID, regardless of people's opinions about oh, was this plan or whatever, you can look at the mentalities of the people. You can look at where's the empathy, where's the use of machinery, the want for one size fits all. Oh, take this cure, it will solve everything. Oh, let's pass this law, it will solve everything. And I see that connection a lot. I kind of want to bring this into another question, if you don't mind. Within the medical field, and of course, I'm a health coach, and I noticed it, especially within my practice. I would talk to doctors, and they would be like, man, I'm restricted. I can't use this medicine because of the FDA or because of this agency, this government agency. And of course, a lot of people may understand, like, yeah, the government is involved with a lot of things, but it seems like it has a big toll on our health as well. And a lot of practitioners don't always acknowledge that, in my view. And I don't know if you agree with that, but if you look at like what you're saying, there's a system that we need to look at, an alternative system to healthcare. Maybe there's an alternative system to politics. And maybe all along, we're just trying to get rid of the systems that don't belong and bring in the systems that naturally are to belong. What would you have to say about that?
Well, I like what you said to start off with your statement about, sometimes doctors can't prescribe things, they can't do what they actually want to do because of the system that they lie within. I mean, that's happened to me, where I needed certain things to stay alive that I couldn't get what I needed. And then I had, again, it depends, very individualistic on the provider or patient, because then maybe another doctor would say, well, I'm going to try to fight for you, and I'm going to call this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. And there was some sort of like nobility, like appreciation that they were fighting for me. But then I could tell that somehow they felt noble in trying to fight the system and do this. Whereas if you just do this inner work, you don't comply with a system that does things in a backwards kind of manner. So a big proponent of doing this inner work is it cultivates a different breed of human being. And then all of a sudden, you don't have to fragment yourself and do things that are harmful to others. I mean, the Hippocratic Oath is do no harm. But meanwhile, within the system and other systems that we have, we're doing a ton of harm because we're complying with things that somehow feel either we want to ignore, or they're over our head, or somehow we have a particular agenda within lying and not being honest to ourselves. So that's why I'm such a proponent of getting people on board to do the inner work, because it starts to literally transform the being that you are, and you don't comply. You don't do things that are against your soul. You don't insult your own soul. And this is where I believe we can start to cultivate a better system, a new system. I don't know exactly how that looks from inside out or outside in, but I do believe that we can only really have a good foundation when we're willing to do the things that we're afraid to do. And you only get to this level of courage and grace and action if you really continue to clean yourself out. For me, it's a daily commitment. I'm on board. I'm already in. So I don't check out or do things to find my alignment. I've done the work to the degree where every day now I'm just like, what needs to go? What thought pattern needs to go? What do I have to address within myself to stay on my mission, to take action within the world? I think that there's a lot of people that have good concepts for recreating our systems and our world. And we have these ideas of how we want to talk about ending slavery and getting things out. But if you're talking about ending slavery, but you're enslaved at home because you're in a codependent relationship with your wife, because you have issues with your mother, and like, you have to figure that out. You have to clean that out in order for you to really cultivate a new paradigm. This isn't just a new business. If you want to cultivate a new paradigm, you have to have many people who have this level of commitment to not comply with what's against our soul, and to not sell out, and to be willing to be uncomfortable. I can't tell you, I was homeless a couple of times along my journey. I had to do things to put myself where I didn't know what was coming next. And it's a big part of the real true initiation of the process, is to do the things that you're most afraid of. And I think that, unfortunately, we just are a part of many systems, politically included, where it's too easy to comply. We have our own personal agendas. We have our own toxic behaviors, and we hang out with that kind of an environment that normalizes it. And that's where we get stuck. So people have to really be willing to say, I'm not this person anymore. I'm not going to hang out with these types of people anymore. I'm going to do the work to find the people that relate with me. And then I'm going to have to stay in that space where we're all encouraging each other to do the work and stay on board and do the hard thing, or we're never going to be able to shift this power dynamic.
Yeah, it sounds like acting on principles, having really firm ground principles, like you said, like self-care, and then bringing that into the world. And something I like to say, and we talked about before, is this idea that if you don't love yourself, well, how can you love anyone else? It's sort of the same thing you mentioned, is like,
Right.
well, you need to work out your own slavery before you can start really helping the world with its enslavement. And it's like, who's to say that you should help everybody else? You got to take a look at yourself, and that's the best thing you can do. The only thing you can do, like you said, it's individualized. Everybody knows themselves the best, and they simply need to listen or get in tune with that. So I definitely like that. The term I use is bio-individuality. At least that's what we use in integrative nutrition. And sort of
That's
what I
great.
see is like an alternative system to like man's law would be natural law, right? Which I'm sure you're aware of. And this whole idea of statism, I don't know if it will ever get recognized by the medical establishment, some people would consider it an illness to think that, hey, some people have more rights than others, or that some
Mhm.
people can dictate to others what they should do with their life, and should have these sort of psychopathic traits of, well, it's okay if violence is okay in this scenario, or it's okay in that scenario. It can get pretty dangerous, and a lot of healthcare practitioners, I feel like, have not they don't know about this. They never looked at it before, and I would like to get your perspective on that, with statism, and how you kind of woke up to that statist agenda, because you kind of you've looked into statism before. We've talked, and you know about Mark Passio and a lot of his
Mhm.
ideas about feminine and masculine, which kind of
Mhm.
deals with like the topics we're talking about with inner union, right? Bringing the
Mhm.
masculine and the feminine together, finding
Mhm.
out the best of each side, creating a
Mhm.
balance, and understanding that maybe if we're thinking all the time and too analytical, we're too left brain, but maybe if we're
Mhm.
too like just doing yoga all day and meditating all the time and we're
Yep.
too right brain.
Yep.
I think
Yep.
that's something we have to practice and understand. And you're right, we have to address ourselves. So while I'm looking at externally, I'm saying, well, look at the government, look at these people. Is that
Mhm.
really as important? But if we have a belief system of our own that is
Mhm.
contributing to those people,
Mhm.
then that is something I want to ask you about. How did you address statism within your life?
Well, it's a big question. What I have to say is, I didn't know about a lot of this myself because it's not taught. I didn't have a family that was interested in this growing up. So it's something that you have to have a knowledge and a desire to educate yourself on. So, I mean, this would be great if this changed. I think it is changing. There are people that are working on different forms of education, even for younger children, to start to actually bring awareness to the important things that we need to be aware of within how certain areas of our government or our system actually is causing oppression and how we comply with that. So there has to be, for me, there was a desire to know, and it was a call to start to educate myself. And that's really when I think I found Mark maybe like, I don't know, I was lucky to find him maybe like 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. And I remember diving into the trivium and diving into his lectures and diving into, his natural law presentations, and, the fake ass Christians, which is that's what I grew up with my father. That's what created so much dissonance with me. And I wanted to get away from spirituality for a long time because that was my model. And then also seeing how I ran in the other direction to find integration for myself. And I became that new age person that was way unintegrated in that aspect. So one of the things that really helped me to have a better grasp on this, how I perceive it, is by understanding what the masculine and feminine principles are, and then really sharing with people and understanding what the wounded versions or the traumatized versions of these energies are. Because very often I find that we just don't even have a base understanding of what's really going on within the world. There's just one side or one narrative that's being displayed. So, as far as men, I mean, there's been a lot of backlash with men and a lot of females blaming everything on the misogyny of men and not taking their own self accountability to realize, wait, you're super toxic with your feminine energy. Don't you see how you manipulate and the things that you do that contribute to this? And then the ways in which we kind of like adjudicate or adapt in toxic ways to try to mitigate that toxic behavior. So then the man becomes passive because the woman's toxic on him, he's passive. So for me, one of the biggest things that helped me to deal with this statism and discover what it really is natural law and how really can this be beneficial to a community like healthcare who's completely left-brained, completely devoid of any of this understanding around natural law for the most part. How can I create a system or something that helps them to understand in a digestible way? And I have that mentality where in this industry, I'm not going to be able to make a change if I come in guns blazing and just try to tear it down. I actually did that because I became so frustrated with the system that I started calling things out. And what I realized is, again, there's that label of like, get this girl out of here. We don't know what's going on with her. So then I sat with myself and I realized, how can I educate this in a way where people feel like they can see me and they want to learn about it? So I kind of took the anger part out, and I realized that I have to approach this with strategy and grace to get them to listen.
I think it's all amazing. I really appreciate that. It's because a lot of the times with this, I think I like to focus on the feminine aspect of things, because with the hyper masculine, the hyper intellectual system that everything's operating under, what it really requires people to do is to ignore themselves and to ignore this feminine aspect and to live in contradiction with themselves, which internal contradiction, I see as will indefinitely lead to disease. I see when someone, it causes stress, it causes schism in the mind and in the body. And, as the mind continues in a contradiction with itself, and you don't have this holistic feminine aspect, you have no ability to look at yourself or look at other people, or look at things in a big picture. You're very zoned in, you're very focused. I call the doctors philosophers, and they're they're all into the surgerism cult, and it's all surgery, or it's philosophy is what I call it. And the school system, I call it the skull system, because it's just all about this intellect. And I have a frustration with it, because I went through it. I was in the medical field, and I would see this, and I couldn't speak out. It was so difficult, and I started to notice just this huge contradiction within myself. And I knew that was causing stress on my life that I knew would make me sick. Especially once the COVID happened, and then I was called a conspiracy theorist for wanting to order medical supplies a month before it came. And then when it came, we were just underhanded, and I was like, it was just totally a toxic way to view things. But yeah, I just think that the holistic ability to come in tune with the feminine and do the self work is really just such an amazing way to view things, rather than trying to prescribe or say do this, do that. It's really look at your experience and find what's going to help you out, help you, and then take that to others.
Mm-hmm. It really is the feminine principle. I mean, we're going to continue to hit brick walls and steel doors, surgery doors, unless we really incorporate the feminine principle. But it's so elusive. I mean, it may show up in the medical field in a hospice situation. It may show up in particular situations for a moment, like a glimpse, like a wave or a breath, a fresh air of the feminine energy. But she needs to be there all the time. So one of my goals is to, and one of the reasons why I never went back to school to finish up, I was going to school for healthcare as well, is because I wanted to be a living embodiment of seeing the holistic perspective. And I call this, I had to be, again, very strategic about trying to get an implementation of the feminine principle, because you can't say, hey guys, guess what? You may think that you're the shit. You've done 100 million wonderful surgeries here, but you have no feminine principle within here. They would have no idea what I'm talking about. There's no concept of understanding this. So I came up with a strategic definition. I call it the subjective experiencer. And what that is the individual who's been through an experience and can bring intuitive knowledge and wisdom to other ways of how they found their healing besides their one size fits all mentality. So basically, it's kind of like a peer mentor. It's kind of like somebody who has a lived embodied experience and can come to the table for another patient and say, hey, I know they're giving you medication for depression and they're doing this, but when I was going through my cancer treatment, I became really connected with nature. I started to study natural law. I started to heal some of my generational trauma. And lo and behold, my stress started to diminish a little bit. So this is it's kind of like a tricky backdoor way of this other wisdom being permitted to come into the system to give patients another opportunity, because you're right. If you don't have holistic intelligence and you don't understand where you've come from and the trauma that you hold, and you don't have education on the ways in which you're being oppressed, you don't know any better, you don't know anything about natural law, or you don't know anything about holistic health, you're going to get sick. I firmly believe that upstream to illness are 1,000 ways in which we could have mitigated it and ameliorated it if we knew better. So we have to have these other ways, or people, I believe, these trained experiencers, to say, hey, these are the things that I did naturally that really have helped me. So I actually work with training subjective experiencers. So just to cultivate, and I do this work with them. So that's kind of the brilliance of it, is that the training that I do involves teaching them aspects of natural law and holistic intelligence, so they can say, oh, wow, you know what? I got off my meds because I did this work, or I was able to do this because of this. Because you're right, it's all connected. When you release your trauma and you get right within your mind, you release the dissonance, the schisms, the inner cognitive dissonance that you have, lo and behold, most often you start to feel a lot better. So that's really my offering, is developing, helping people to develop emotional intelligence, a sense of a spiritual intelligence, understanding how we're all connected, giving them this roadmap of other awarenesses and opportunities for them to hopefully find a natural, holistic way to heal.
I like the term that you used. You called it subjective experiencer. Is that what you said?
Yeah,
I
I
think that's
did.
amazing, and I think that really is a great way to embody the feminine, because rather than, everyone's heard the person saying, this is how you should do it, this is how it's done, but when you put yourself and say, when I experienced this, I did this and I experienced that, through my experience, it's really a more feminine way of approaching it than just saying, oh, this is what you
Yeah.
need, you know?
I
And
got to be
I
honest
think
with you. When I used to hear Mark constantly talk about, it's objective like it's just everything is objective. It's objective morality, right? And I used to be like, wait, well, hold on, because I have this really amazing subjective experience that, to me, in the medical framework, the objective is science. So the integrated, this is the key, guys, the integrated subjective experiencer, not the one who's had an experience and is operating expressing their subjective experience through the lens of trauma. This is where the subjective is demoralized and wrong, is because if you don't understand where your feelings are coming from, then you can fragment into some sort of really funky subjective morale, like a view of relativism, right? You can do that if you don't know yourself. But if you have a subjective experience that's integrated through a lens that's more clean, then guess what you have in medicine? The masculine objective, which is needed, and the subjective feminine, who has an integrated, experiential, holistic lens of the process. And when those two come together, that's when I think we can have a hope for the medical field beginning a shift. So that's exactly right, Aaron, is how can I get the feminine into medicine was my one and only question. How can I get her, the holistic intelligence in? And I realized, the people who have the lived experience, let's get them to do their trauma work so they can come to this sharing from a clearer lens and give people an opportunity to be more holistic with their experience too. So the subjective experiencer, in my eyes, is the feminine in the healthcare system, coalesced with the objectivity that we do need in aspects of science and medicine. Look, I had surgeries. I get it. I needed it. I had 2 kidney transplants. So I can't say it's all bad. But you're right. We just go right there and completely leave the feminine out. So my hope is that this sacred feminine, the integrated, the feminine who knows herself, needs to show up in the medical field as that. So then he can question, wow, look at this woman energy. Maybe I need to level up in my thinking and I can be better for my patients because she's here. Look at what she's doing. So that's my hope. Thank you, Aaron, because it's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, of course. Corey and I think we mentioned this before, and it's kind of a play on words, but I guess you could say that the masculine has experiments and the feminine has experience. It's like,
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
it's kind of like this, everyone's all sciencey and they're all about the experiments and the data,
So
but
how can we prove that people have empathy? We need to
yeah,
find the
yeah.
science.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
how do you know that the feminine is like, well, there's the experience that is the lived knowledge. It's the lived actuality and truth,
Have you ever got hurt before? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like
I
have
can't
you touched a
quantify that.
hot burner first? Because if you've
Right.
touched it
Right.
before, you're probably going to want to tell other people not to touch it. But if you don't have that
Right.
experience first, then you might not believe the person who says don't touch it. But if you don't believe them and you
Right.
don't have the knowledge that it will hurt you, then you
Mm,
might end up getting
mm,
hurt.
Yeah.
yeah.
So the interesting thing about this, I'm going to kind of speak abstractly about the masculine and feminine because I have such a deep sense of understanding and love for both of them very much. I've done this work within myself. I had to first really start to heal and understand my relationship with my own inner masculine and feminine. This is part of the process. There was a lot of work that had to be done within myself. And even in the freedom community and the truth community, I see a lot of people who have that action to do something in the world, but they haven't really healed some of their own inner masculine or integrated feminine within them as well, because these dynamics, these energies. I was speaking to a friend that you actually introduced me to, Corey Scott, the other day, and he had this beautiful understanding and expression of, as we evolve in consciousness, systemically, individually, it's a constant process of reach and withdrawal, out and in. It's just like the universe, right? It's her and him. It's sex, it's divine, it's out and in, right? So it has to be this, as I proceed out even further into the universe, I'm going to be sucked in even further to understand what's in the shadow. And then I'm going to express, I'm going to reach, and I'm going to withdraw. This is like a constant masculine and feminine dynamic that goes on within us and then has to go in and actually occurs in the field through men and women and in environments. So this is the same template. If we can map this out appropriately, can change group dynamics within systems as well. If people are to understand, where am I on this spectrum? What do I need to integrate and evolve within myself? And then how do I take these energies into relationships? Even in a man and a woman relationship, you understand that if it's a divine connection, it's not that one stays sacred masculine and one stays sacred feminine. That is the underlying foundation of the understanding. But when you're really with a true counterpart, you're always dancing with the energies. And like someone might be a little more here and one's a little more here. But at the root of who you are, you know who you are. I am the sacred feminine. So it's that beauty of understanding how these energies work together. But you have to understand it within yourself, or you're blindly going out there operating in a field that you don't understand. And that, I believe, is how we got where we are today, is because we never had, I think that there's this disease, I want to call it a dis-ease of pulling the carriage before the horse, or how do they say that, where we have an ideology and we want to implement it, we get so excited about it, but we haven't really truly done the work to have the knowledge, or the masculine, the consciousness and knowledge coalesced with the experience and the love and the care. You need to have the one who has the full lived experience with the person who has the knowledge thereof. These two need to work together. And in the majority of all of the systems, politics, banking, medical, it's just been a masculine who's usurped her experience. And now she's like, hi, I'm here now. I've done my work. I'm not that woman that you remember me to be. I'm different now. And I'm embodied and I know what needs to be done. And now you need to listen to me and we need to work together. We need to get back together. And I love this because it also gives me hope for relationship in general. Because so many people I know struggle in their relationship dynamic. They're still struggling with codependency and some very deep systemic issues within their relationship. And now we have so many people who are Met Gal, men going their own way, women saying, I'm empowered, I don't need a man. This doesn't help civilization evolve either. So we really need men and women to start to fall in love again. We need some sort of healthy embodied renaissance, not just a free-for-all, but something that's actually integrated and we have become aware and conscious too. And I think that's the potential of where we lie right now on this historical trajectory, is to say we've done a whole bunch of things without true consciousness. And now we've tapped into this ability to become conscious through self-awareness and discernment and the work. Now let's go back out with this awareness and do it right this time. But there's a fear of a breakdown of the old, and the people who can't seem to get to the work, don't want to do the work, resist the work, are too comfortable in their reality and their money to do this kind of breakdown. That's the war that we're in. We're in the war between the unconscious who want to remain unconscious because it served them well, and the people who are like, no, 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 this can't be how we go future or go forward in our future civilization.
Wow. Yeah. Beautiful. Very powerful. Thank you very much for sharing all this information. Is there anything else that you want to share? I think we can wrap it up. I mean, you have tons of resources for people. I recommend everybody checks it out. So you have a workbook that you're going to provide, right?
Yeah, yeah, I'm gonna have a workbook that I'll be sending to you too, which will be great. It'll be just a nice little introduction to help people to start the process.
Great.
Just start. Yep. And it's never
Fantastic.
finished. So that's the nice thing. There's not some sort of conclusion. I know we all like to know, show me what I have to do so I can conclude it and do the thing. We have to look at things a little bit differently, that this is a process and it's a potential that's always potentiating. And we never want to close that gap or close the door to that potentiation.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why I
Amazing.
always ask questions too. Like in a lot of what I've been doing, like just been talking to people about anything. And I apply these same health principles to pretty much everything else because it applies
Mhm,
universally across the board because we're dealing with
mhm,
people. And the people are the
mhm,
root to everything that grows, everything that manifests, anything that's allowed or permissed into being.
mhm. Absolutely. Like you guys said, there's a very important part of health that's externalized, that can be looked at as a masculine form of health and wellness in the health spectrum, in the health sector. Practices, demonstrations, diet, there's these external things we can do that are very important. But then the feminine portion of health and wellness also is coalesced with the inner work that constantly needs to be coalesced and married to the outer work that we're doing. And as up to this point, we've glorified the external means for health and wellness, which are the things that you're doing rather than the things that you're undoing so you can become something slightly different. So these two just getting to know each other a little bit better and committing to both of them.
Yeah. Are you truly free? And if you don't know your own freedom, if
If
you're
you're
just
not
told that you're
free,
free.
that's right. If you aren't free, you will go on a perpetual seeking adventure for the next best thing for your health. And then when that burns out, you look for the next best thing for your health. And now you're doing this. Now you're doing, Reiki, energy work, Ayurveda, then you're doing yoga, then you're doing anti-aging, then you're doing this medicine, then you're doing this vitamin. I get it. There's a lot of wonderful external means of doing things. But if you don't coalesce that with doing nothing, going within, clearing yourself out, understanding who you are, balancing your right and left hemisphere of your brain, finding inner consciousness and awareness, your seeking will have no path. There will be no direction and you will get lost. And at some point, you will hit your knees and you will have a dark night of the soul and say, I don't have any energy to do anything else outside of me. What am I missing? That's exactly what, coming full circle, what all of my clients and patients used to say to me. I've done everything and it's not working. Right, because you haven't incorporated and integrated your inner self, your feminine principle. And then you start to do that, and it's an aha. It's a complete realization that we've been operating in this world at 50% capacity, thinking that we know it all, and that there's this whole other world that we need to integrate to become holistic.
Wow, powerful. That's amazing. Yeah, and I said to you before, I think that's part of the reason why a lot of health coaches, which is a new practice, are mostly
Mhm.
women, and why the industry and why they're doing so well. I think women are nurturers. They're people who can definitely help a lot of people, but men can absolutely tap into that feminine source of energy as well. And
You're
I think
right.
it's just a matter of choice. Um,
One last thing I'd like to say
Sure.
is in that health coaching industry, which is the fastest growing industry. And you're right, there are a lot of women in this industry because they have been so desperately seeking this form of intelligence that they embody. The classic feminine wound is I don't feel seen, I don't feel heard, and I don't feel appreciated, and I feel like I live in a box, because that's where we've put the feminine energy. So now these women are coming out saying, like, no, 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 I know something and you need to listen to me. But it's important that those feminine energies as well are working to integrate their masculine within themselves as well. I feel as though to really push forward in a paradigm shift, we have to do more working together to start. Meaning the sacred feminine who's really coming into her own embodiment of feminine wisdom, and the masculines who have come into a level of understanding and discernment with their masculine energy. I think to really ground it, to really create the steady first principles of foundation, let's get these men with these women and create a third energy to cultivate something even more powerful. I just feel as though it's still rarer to see a fully embodied woman who has them both figured out, and man who's really clear on both hemispheres of the brain. These people do exist. But what I feel we could do in the meantime is let's get these two together. Let's get men and women together and have more conscious communication on how we can continue to cultivate this new paradigm with a really healthy, fertile breeding ground. Back to sex, back to love, back to creation. Like, let's get these two together, because I see a lot of men who I watch. I'm really attracted to a lot of thinkers and a lot of men, and all, I'm watching Mark all the time and watching the people that he's connected to and other really brilliant philosophers and thinkers and psychologists, but none of them are really talking to women. And you see all of these women kind of talking together, but they're not really talking to men. And if I see a group of intellectual men bring on a woman, she's super left brain. She's this embodiment of the feminine potential who knows herself is like really almost still completely devoid in the scene, unless you find her still, she's still kind of hiding in the spiritual community. She has to ground herself and come out. And these masculines have to really see what it's like to, how does a real embodied masculine talk and converse and be with a real potentiated feminine embodiment, to where they're not trying to be like each other, but they're really stretching each other to really see how much can be created and cultivated if they let themselves really be in their individual power. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to see, is more men and women actually doing some work more together.
Yeah, as nature intended. This
Yeah.
is beautiful. I love this topic, and I thank you for getting into this. If anybody wants to see a lot more speakers like this, I recommend checking it out. Like you mentioned, Scott Gordon. A lot of people have talked about sort of this inner work because of how important it is, and people would be surprised to hear about it, because a lot of people might want to hear about today's latest event or what's going on. Give me the latest remedy, like you said, the external remedy. And this is more powerful, and we have other workbooks and we have other books, so I recommend people checking it out. Your works, where could people find your work? Like,
So I have, so my main contribution right now is coming through Awakening Healthcare. But I do private work as well, which I've done for a very long time, and that's on my website, StephanieMoDavis.com. And then some of the other sites I have are really geared towards shifting the medical system, which is Integration Mentors, which introduces the subjective experiencer and what needs to be done to get that individual onto healthcare teams. And then I also have a repository of just some really first principle revisiting of healthcare information, which is on regeneratinghealthcare.org.
awesome. Yeah, I might have to get involved more myself, I'll be honest, if I'm going to revisit the healthcare field. But I appreciate it, and if anybody wants to hear a lot more talks like this, go to nita.one/summit. nita.one/summit. This is the end of Slavery Summit. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Aaron, for joining me. Take care, everybody.